enjoyed sending my students to the library for information sessions in a range of classes from the 100 all the way up to the 400 level. And I think it's useful because they both learn what the library resources are in my area, 17th and 18th century British literature, but also it seems to me that they are learning kind of information literacy skills that will sort of be good for them in whatever class that they're taking. I think one thing that I didn't know as an incoming faculty member that I would have liked to have known is how students get exposed to the library collections. And I just didn't know if the sessions that I was scheduling were redundant, if the students had already had kind of an introduction to the library. And what I have learned is that to the best of my knowledge, there is no one way in which students come to the library and get oriented to searching the catalogue. So as I understand it, in their first few weeks on campus, they do get a walkthrough of the library, but they don't get kind of hands-on advice in searching. So if you're worried, if one is worried about creating busy work for students or duplicating an experience that they've already had, I think the librarians are so willing to tailor each session to the specific needs of one's class and one's assignment that it really is worthwhile for the students. And they may seem like they're going to, they may tell you that they're repeating stuff, but it's really useful for them. The assignment that I typically give is just a very straightforward research assignment. They have to pose a question about some historical or cultural detail about an 18th century text, research it, and just write up the results. So before the library session, I send our liaison a copy of the assignment. And what happens then is usually she sets up a page specifically for my class that will give students information about how to find the print sources on this topic in the library, which is not always their first move. A couple of reference works that will have useful bibliographies for the students, and again, the students are not necessarily clued into looking at bibliographies and using them as sources. And then finally, information about the most relevant databases, and importantly, tips for searching those databases so that the students can kind of have a head start on using them. At the session, one thing that I do ask the librarian to kind of cover in a typical session is subject heading searches, because the students don't tend to use those. And if they're in a content area that's not necessarily familiar to them, they may not know the relevant subject headings. So my students may be investigating something about sentimental literature, but they don't know that the keyword of sensibility is really important in the same period. But if they do subject heading searching on sort of fiction in the 18th century, they will find that term. And I think one of the most important things the students learn at the session is that the quality of the output is really determined by the quality of the input, and that they get a sense of the breadth of materials that the library has. And so if they only come up with 2 books on a subject, they then know that there's probably more. Going into it, they don't know what we have in 18th century studies. They may think there are only 2 books, but there are not, and kind of the library session helps them to realize that more is available. And in terms of sort of the work that I then get from the students, I think it's really impressive the sources that they end up finding as a result of, I believe, sort of as I say, the information literacy that they've kind of cultivated at the library session. They don't just have 5 books from the 1940s. Makeup is a perennially popular topic, so one woman was researching cosmetics in the 18th century, and she found a great article by Tita Chico at the University of Maryland, which looks at makeup and poetic language and Pope's poetry to think about consumer culture in the 18th century. And it was just the kind of source that I would have wanted her to read and pointed her to. And she was able to find that on her own and read it and use it as a source for her paper. So I think, as I say, that the students are really learning how to rank sources, prioritize which are good sources, and then I actually enjoy reading these papers, which is not necessarily always my reaction when I get a set of papers, but I do enjoy reading this particular set of papers, and it makes my grading much easier because I have less work to do, so what's not to like?